We're good. Bonjour, monsieur.
Salut, salut.
Ça va?
Ça va très bien toi-même?
Bien, merci. All right, man. Look, this is an honor. We met an hour and a half ago.
It's very recent, yeah.
We met an hour and a half ago, which is a very big change on my side as well, only because the majority of people that I've been fortunate enough to bring through the studio have been people that I've known for decades.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, so they've been, we're talking childhood friends, in some cases, people that are as close to me as family is, things like that. So to finally be able to have a really, really candid discussion with someone that I just think is interesting as hell is an absolute treat.
Well, maybe we just hit ourselves on the head and we forgot we knew each other for the past 20 years.
I wouldn't be surprised, considering how easy it's been to just share stuff with you and hear a little bit more about your story as well. So I thought a great place for us to start is you said something really interesting. You said something that immediately grabbed me. It immediately caught my eye, or caught my ears rather, caught my attention. And you'd mentioned that you were in a dark spot, in a difficult spot, at a time where you had leaned very heavily into a creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave that as the intro because I'm so intrigued to hear how this all unfolds.
Yeah, I believe the analogy I used was I touched the bottom of the barrel, which is a brewing analogy because brewing beer, as weird as it may sound, is how I believe I got out of that barrel. And I was in a very dark place. Like, it was the middle of the pandemic. I live alone. I saw nobody.
Mm-hmm.
I had a job at the time that I didn't like. That was very frustrating. And I felt no bonus, no added value, no fun, no social presence, no purpose, like all the good stuff that gives your life meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, like I realized it had been 6 months since everything had just gotten worse. And I don't know how it happened, but I just started following my curiosity. Like I remember at the time, a friend came to me, and he said, "Hey man, you wanted to brew beer, right?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So there's this kit it's a brewing starter kit for $50, and I was like, you know what? I have nothing to lose. I can waste $50. I can lose interest. I can do it, and I can stop caring about it. So I started brewing beer. I just do that one thing. I follow my curiosity. I brew beer. I do 1 batch, 2 batch. I start buying books. I start reconnecting with friends who start giving me advice. And then I buy this one book on the history of beer. By doing that one thing, I had no idea it would change my life. It was a book called The Bible of Beer, the Beer Bible.
Okay.
Like, it's a huge document. It's enormous. There was one chapter there on the history of beer in Egypt.
Okay.
And I read that, and I read it like 2, 3, 4 times, and I was like, I love history. Maybe I should read more about history. So I started brewing. I started reading about history. And then I meet Jérémy, the owner of that very studio,
Mm-hmm.
who's like, hey, man, you could do a podcast. And I'm like, can I? He's like, sure. I've got the infrastructure. There's nothing holding you up. And I was like, okay. Well, I start brewing beer. I start reconnecting with a former passion of mine. And then I started doing a podcast. And as a result of that, now I'm here with you. I have a successful podcast. I work for a podcast studio. I have tons of projects on the go. We do beer advertisement as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I've grown so much more just because I was self-conscious, self-aware enough to realize that there was something important when a message popped up in my mind that said, hey, you should maybe read that. Or, hey, you should maybe do that.
Right.
Curiosity. There's this one saying that says, curiosity killed the cat. I believe that's true to a certain extent, right? But curiosity can also get you out of the barrel.
In this case, it gave you wings.
Exactly. It's been a very positive experience. Going from the place where nothing makes sense, there's no purpose, to a place where a lot of things make sense and everything has purpose. Like, here's one thing I found by essentially following my curiosity and building on it and trusting myself to be able to deliver on projects that I start.
Mm-hmm.
I get a lot of motivation, and I get a whole lot more of purpose. And purpose is not an easy thing to describe or to get. Some people don't need purpose, I think. Some people need a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have a purpose already because they've got family, they've got close ones, they've got projects without even looking for it. But for those that don't have a purpose, when you find it, you realize how much you've missed. And sometimes a purpose can be just, I don't know, taking care of your family or your community.
Yeah. For
Right.
myself, I feel there have been times in my life where purpose has been not just lacking, but something that I felt I had lost. And I wasn't aware of it in the moment, but then upon reflection and upon a little bit of a deeper dive into even just the way that I was feeling, it became very, very apparent, very clear, abundantly clear that I was lacking purpose. And when I clued in on it, it unraveled every sense of comfort, every sense of complacency, every sense of any kind of peace that I thought I had, because it made me feel and realize that the purpose I was lacking was the exact same lack that I was feeling across multiple other aspects of my life. And it would at first hurt like crazy. There'd be this very, very sharp, acute pain, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, even physically. It would manifest itself physically. And the second I got back onto my shit and I started actually pursuing the things that were important to me and placing importance where it belonged, I felt a lot of that misalignment start to finally come in into a much clearer view, into a much more focused and intentional expulsion of effort. And I realized really quickly that every time I feel that from now on, or this was at the time, I realized if I feel that again, when I feel that again, I'm sure I will. When I feel it again, I have to do everything I possibly can to refocus.
So, did you feel lack of purpose itself, or did you feel other things and then realize, oh, maybe that's because I don't have a purpose?
I think it's been both.
Yeah.
And the reason that I say I think it's been both is because there have been times where I have felt that a lot of the actions that I was working on or placing importance on were really not important and were really not worthy of the effort that I was attaching to them and putting into them. And that would lead me to believe that maybe I didn't have purpose. And then there were other times where I was just doing something with such focused intent that I would question whether that was my focus. So I've felt it, I feel, on both sides. And both have resulted in, I think, pushing me to further explore and better understand my own motivations, whether they are economic in nature or whether they are, psychological in nature. If I was looking to try to just maybe understand something from my past or pain that I'd buried, whatever it might be, like all of us go through. And the motivators, regardless of how different they are, they end up leading me back to a point of I have to have a why. This has been something philosophically that I've struggled with, but I've also flourished because of it. If I can't answer my own why with conviction, then I'm doing something wrong. If I don't have a why for why I'm pursuing something, why I'm attaching importance to something, why I'm spending time with someone, whatever it might be, and it can be very, very macro or it can be very, very micro. But if I can't define that why for myself, then I know I definitely can't describe that why and explain that why to anyone else.
Yeah.
And so therefore I'm probably lacking purpose, probably lacking some sort of conviction.
Do you think it's mostly because you can't explain it to yourself or to others? Because this has been one of the most challenging things in my life. I've always been awkward, socially awkward,
Okay.
up until very recently. Very socially awkward, as if I felt like I needed to play a role in order to have a successful interaction with someone. Partly that's shyness, partly that's lack of confidence, right? So, one of the most existentially threatening questions that I ever asked was, who are you? What do you do?
Right.
These are simple questions. And I would go through my entire life. My entire life would pass in front of my eyes before I could answer the question.
Okay.
And I was just giving a hard time to the person who was just trying to get to know me, right? Because I was like, I was paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
And that makes me think that for me it was important, or that's when I could explain successfully who I am to someone, that I realized it for myself. But maybe that's not the best way to go, right? Because you have two parts of you. You have the internal you, that's the you for you, that's the intimate you, that's the real you, that's the deep you, and then there's the public facing part of you that's subject to conventions, that's subject to the war of perceptions, that's subject to competition for status. We're all subject to to that to a certain extent, right?
Right.
Because we're mammals, we got to survive. We're not perfect. Our capacities are all bound by some limit, and we have animal instincts, right? So there's the intimate you and there's the public facing you. So that makes me wonder, like, which part of you is more active, you or me, right? So I realized that because, so
That's a wild thing to think about.
which part of you is more active? Yeah, well,
Yeah, it's a really cool thing to think about.
I read this guy, Carl Rock, one of the most interesting scholars that exists that I discovered, I think, in a podcast from Joe Rogan. They were discussing magic mushrooms and their potential role in civilization. And I think he was receiving Paul Stamets, the guy who's an expert on mycology, so on mushrooms. And they were making a point: let's not call them magic mushrooms, but let's call them what they are. They're hallucinogenic mushrooms. And I'm sort of forgetting where I'm going with that. Oh yeah, there was a book, super illuminating book called "Key to Immortality," which investigates the role of ancient psychedelics in antiquity, in the earliest religious experience that we have in the Western world. So they were exploring the role of very sacred sacraments in life. One of the experts that was interrogated in the book is Carl Rock, who's a specialist of Dionysus. And the guy got into the humanities because he was deeply interested in psychology. And he was told by one of his mentors, well, you're not actually that interested in psychology, you're interested in people and stories and all that. So he got into mythology.
Okay.
And he came with this idea in one of his interviews saying you should be cautious and worried potentially and maybe even concerned about how you act in person and how you choose to describe yourself in public, because that tends to be either the opposite or the mirror of who you really are. So you have to be very careful about how you present yourself to the public, because it might be a conscious effort to do something against what you're naturally doing, or it might be a conscious effort to distance yourself against your true self.
Okay.
Like, he wasn't saying you're the opposite of who you are or you're a bad person. He was saying, pay attention. Pay attention to what you choose to show to others. And that made me extremely self-aware. It was an innocuous, almost banal statement in answer to a question that had almost nothing to do with the topic. And for me, it was super illuminating. Be very careful what you choose to show in public.
And it's one of these things where it's almost very basic at the surface, but the way that we internalize it, the way that we, I guess to some extent, perceive it, is influenced so heavily by where we are in our life individually, where we feel we fit in society, so micro, macro, and where we feel we're able to contribute value. I feel like all of these things are influenced so heavily by exactly that. But we only realize how important it is, and we only realize how deep that really goes when you stop to think about how many aspects of your life it touches, how many layers deep it ends up going.
It's crazy that we chat here and think about thinking, literally, like we're thinking about the influence of thoughts. And our conclusion is sometimes you should think less. And it's not an invitation to stop thinking, it's an invitation to be aware of the moment. It's like thinking about the more present interactions that are available to you and that are capable of deep meaning that you don't see. I think we live in an era that is chronically deficient in meaning.
Yeah.
Partly that's because of the success of our species and creating an artificial comfort that our bodies and mind aren't geared to support. Like, there are things like mortgages that we're not biologically equipped to handle. Like, you were talking about handles that you're not handles, mortgages that you're taking care of right now.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the kind of unnatural stress that's put on our body because of mundane stressors like mortgages, or just, are you going to find a school for your children, because schools are super expensive in North America, and then the daycare is extremely expensive. At least in Ontario, it's like a second mortgage, right? Speaking of mortgage again.
Yeah, of course.
So your body doesn't know the difference between a mortgage and a lion that's about to attack you. The difference is a lion is a high stressor. High stressor means it disappears, then you're through with it, you can get on with your day. A mortgage is a medium stressor. meaning it doesn't naturally disappear, and there's no evident way to get rid of it. So it's always there.
Mhm.
So you're always stressed, and the stress accumulates, and it reduces your attention span. It reduces the quality of your life, but also it makes you super irritable. We're not made for that, and we're not being told by our parents or our school system that we've created a society that works in many, many, many ways, but that because of how well it works, makes us alien in our own world, in our own psyche.
Mhm. Yeah, and this is whenever you hear about the revolving door of debt, it's self-induced.
Sorry, what is that?
Have you ever heard about
I
this
don't
concept?
know. I don't think I
The
have.
the revolving door of debt. So what ends up happening is that, we mentioned this. I mentioned this just to yourself and Martin a little bit earlier, saying, look at the blueprint, the way that we are put through education, formal education, specifically here in North America. I can't speak to other parts of the world, but I know this to be true of North America. Get the best education you can, land the highest paying job, buy the most expensive things.
Right.
That's the order that we're taught. Instead of, like I was saying to you earlier, where we should be placing weight on things like effective communication, how to pursue things with balance rather than letting your ambition get the best of you or becoming stagnant.
Yeah.
All of these types of things. Debt is similar in the sense that when you get to, are you familiar with, for example, the notion of keeping up with the Joneses? You ever heard
I've
about
heard
this?
that. Yeah.
So keeping
It's
up
a
with
show,
the
isn't
Joneses.
it?
It's based on a show, but the reality of it is that, so for example, I'm here and you live here, and I see that, oh, you bought a new car, now I have to go out and buy
I
a new
remember
car.
now.
And people end up just getting themselves into this twisted game of,
Yeah.
I was going to say naivety. It's not naivety. It's, what's the word? It starts with a V. I'm going to draw a blank on this word.
How about an F? Futility?
Futility is these are exercises in futility, to say the
Yeah.
least, but
But they have a
vanity, by the way, is the word I was thinking
Vanity.
of. It's an exercise in vanity, and what ends up happening is that this constant pursuit
Yeah.
of higher vanity ends up creating this unbelievably crushing debt in the lives of so many people. And there's such things as good debt and bad debt,
Yeah.
but for the most part, 95% of it is bad debt. There's no reason someone should have, and I say this having spoken to a lot of friends, people that I care about, people that I love.
Dude, that's extremely worrying.
Yeah.
It's extremely worrying. 95% is bad debt.
It is bad
That's
debt.
what you mean.
Yeah, because
throughout North America and Canada and the
this
US?
isn't a stat that anyone's going to quote, but I look at it and I say 95% of debt is bad. The only debt that you should ever really have is potentially a home, and even that can be argued in some cases, is mortgage debt.
What
But
about university? What about
I'd still say it's terrible because it's stacked against you. It's meant to keep you there. So when I talk about, now coming full circle, when I talk about the revolving door of debt, the idea is that every time you go through one of those little revolutions, you're paying out whatever you can in debt, but you're barely touching the principal. So the principal amount that you owe is going to stay intact, or at least in the most tact way that it can, while charging you, maximizing the amount that it can charge you, and charging you constantly at that. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you can't afford a minimum payment, you're now not living paycheck to paycheck anymore. Now you are spending your paycheck and more. So you're putting more pressure on the debt and increasing the amount of debt that you already have to try and clear the debt. Do you see how crazy that can, how quickly that can completely spiral?
Yeah, and in French we call it the debt cycle, and it's exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
And what that means is, unless you have easy access to capital, or you just come from money, the system works well against you.
The house always wins.
Yeah. It's a scary thought, because I was reading about this in the past couple of years. I mean, the data just keeps accumulating. There's one crisis after crisis, and essentially the middle class that built the West is collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gone, and it's not going to die tomorrow. It's going to be there for at least a few other decades.
Well, they say the best vampires bleed their victims dry only so that they can be fed on again. And it seems like more and more that's a dark thing to say, but it's the truth, right? So you look at the way that the government kind of right now, specifically here in North America, you look at the way that the government has been putting certain policies and certain things in place, and it feels more and more like that, like what you just said, where it's not like the middle class is going to disappear tomorrow, but they're being constantly bled down to a level only to start bouncing back and then be bled down even more, bounce back, bled down. This is all, by the way, the whole reason I brought this up and the debt was to talk a little bit more to what you had mentioned about how our bodies are not built biologically or otherwise, to take on stress like this? And this isn't to say that we're not capable of taking on that stress, but rather, how do you flourish as a species? How do
Yeah.
you flourish as an individual when you are carrying the weight of random, crazy, ridiculous noise like this on your shoulders
Yeah.
instead of doing everything you possibly can to ascend to your own potential?
But I think the answer lies in the sacred, lies in the immaterial, it lies in the mysteries of life, it lies in the conscious, deliberate pursuit of things that are beyond the material world that aren't rational. And there are good things that aren't rational, and there are really, really, really bad things that aren't rational. If you think about nourishing a dream, for instance, that comes from your childhood, there is a rational way to do that so that it doesn't do any harm, so that it inspires you at the very least, or it reminds you of what you could be, right? There's plenty of irrational things that are extremely harmful, that are deliberately shared on all sorts of media, that plenty of ideologies. But what I mean is the consciousness of the mystery of the invisible, unseen world of your own potential, actually. I mean, let's put aside ideology and religion and think about who you are as an individual. How complicated it was for you to be born and everything that led to there. The infinite potential that you have in your own body and mind. If one were to be aware of the full the full implication, the full scale of the full area of implications that comes with being born, you would probably be crushed and you would, go to the asylum right now. It would be impossible to bear. But if you look deep within yourself, what you have is potential. You have the most magical thing that there is in the universe, which is the transformative power of sheer will. Almost no other species has that. We have creativity, we have intellect, we have a very able body. We have within ourselves the capacity to produce paradise at the very least in our mind. The most divine thing there is in all creation is our own ability to create. And that's not something to be taken lightly. And this isn't something that comes just from me, Pierre. It comes from one of the persons that I respect the most in the entire history of the world, Marcus Aurelius.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I'm a Stoic.
Oh, so we're learning a little bit more about our boy Piat over here.
And I realize I might not be the only one.
Oh man, talk to me, baby. This is wicked.
So Marcus Aurelius is one of the most interesting persons that ever lived. He was a Roman emperor in about the first century of our era. He lived half of his life campaigning more or less in the area known today as Germany, along the Danube River. Like for maybe 10, 16, 20 years, I don't remember. He was out waging war, defending the empire, in quotes. And he wrote, he was a bit of a poet. He kept a bit of a diary. And he eventually died, and he told his entourage, his close ones, when I die, this thing that I wrote, make sure it disappears. It can't be published. And it was published against his will. The thing he published is called Meditations. It's him talking to himself, talking to a younger self, trying to inculcate some common sense to him. And it's full of gentleness, kindness, but also cold assessment. And it's humane, and so thoroughly humane and profound and deep that you wouldn't expect that from someone who's essentially fighting a war all
From
the
a
time.
general.
From a general.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this way now at looking at past times as everyone's a brute, essentially. Everyone's either a dictator or everyone is poor and dying all the time. And here comes this guy who's a general, who could be doing other things, who decides to write philosophy in his spare time, and he takes that very, very seriously. And there's one line in his entire work that I think about every single day. And the line is, if you look deep within yourself, you will find an endless stream. And for me, that was the only thing I need to keep motivated in hard times, because it can't be false. It has to be true. You
Right.
can't disagree with it. I mean, your survival instinct calls for it to be true.
Right.
And it can be true in the sense that you can find within yourself the strength that you need to do the things that you have to do. If all else fails, you have yourself, and you don't know how deep a person you are. You don't need how much strength there is in you. You don't know how much love there is in you. You don't know how much goodness there is in you. You don't know how much competence there is in you. You don't know how much endurance there is with you. It's only when you get really tested that you reveal yourself. It's only really when things start to go south that you elevate yourself and you grow and you become a better version of yourself, right? So something has to nourish that stream, but the stream is there. It's strong. It's present. It's your survival instinct. Just that, I think, gives you some kind of divinity.
One of the other things that that Marcus Aurelius spoke a lot about was self-talk, and I'm sure you've seen this. I think you're going to be way
the
more in tune
meditations
with.
are essentially self-talk. He's talking to himself.
Yeah, but it wasn't just the way that he, I guess in this case, the way that this was published against his will. It wasn't just the way that he spoke about that. There are other pieces of his works, and I'm not going to be able to cite the titles of them or whatnot, but I remember them very, very well. There are several other accounts of him maybe not even instructing, but guiding people on how to correct and how to instruct their own self-talk. So it's not so much a collection of his own self-talk, so much as it is how to be proficient with your own self-talk. That was what got me interested in Marcus Aurelius, was initially just the fact that he believed firmly that your potential is limited by and achieved by your self-talk. Not so much the actions that you take, but rather the way in which you speak to yourself, the way in which you perceive yourself, the way in which you speak to your own conviction, the way that you express all these things.
Can you define self-talk?
Yeah, for me, self-talk, I can define it, by my own definition. I think everybody has their own sort of way that they've internalized it. But for myself, my self-talk is when you said something really, really well. You put something really well. You said a cold assessment. That was something that Marcus Aurelius did. This wasn't influenced by him in this particular case, but I feel the example is prudent. For me, I go through and I evaluate the decisions that I've made today against the decisions that I thought I would be making yesterday and against the decisions that I feel I will have to make tomorrow. And I look back through all of these things and I say, I have made the decisions to the best of my ability and to the best of my capability with the information and with the skill set that I have today. Will I be proud of them tomorrow when presumably I will have leveled up. I will be in a position of greater strength relative and compared to myself and the version of me from yesterday. And it's important. It's much easier said than done, but it's important to be gentle, compassionate, kind, accepting, and even encouraging for that matter, to past versions of yourself. I used to believe very starkly against this. I used to be all about fuck the old versions of myself, bury them. I'm so glad that's done. I'm so glad I got out of that. I'm so glad I'm not that version of myself anymore.
Yeah.
But that's a really toxic place to be individually.
100%. I agree. I know exactly what you mean.
It sinks you.
Because I used to be angry at my younger self for having failed to do many things that I wanted to do, but the failures are responsible for my very ability to look back on myself with the standards that I have today.
Right.
It's not very intuitive, but I'm not going to say that they were necessary. I mean, the things that I think that I failed at or that I was very severe in judging myself against, but they help create the person who's much more aware than I am today.
That, and I feel for all of the ways that I used to just absolutely shit on the old versions of myself, how could I possibly be mad at that version of myself? Because it gave way and it made way for the version of who I am today. And the version of who I am today is going to make way, pave the way, forge the path, you name it, whatever adjective and whatever kind of metaphor you want to throw in here. The version of me today is going to do that for the version of me tomorrow. So if I fast forward to 4 years from now, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, however many years I have left, if I fast forward and I look through all these things, how can I possibly be mad at a version of myself if it only led me to continuously keep leveling up? there was a seismic shift. Now coming back to the, how do I define self-talk?
Mm-hmm.
It's how do I see, I guess if I were to distill it into a nutshell, I'd say, how do I see past versions of myself? And based on those past versions of myself, am I being gracious with them?
Yeah.
Or am I being grueling with them?
Yeah. I sometimes picture myself as an old version of myself in a picture who's looking back at me, smiling. And it's weird because it comes from a picture that I took at me at the gym
Yeah.
on the software that like artificially ages you.
Okay, cool.
And I had dreams of that picture of me because the guy really looked like it could be me at some point.
Okay.
But my smile was sort of deformed by the software. So
Yeah.
I look like I'm about to cry. so
So it's just painting a really nice picture for you.
it's a great picture. So I look like I'm 70.
Yeah.
I have a big beard. It's all white.
Yeah.
And my smile has been sort of tweaked, and it's not as happy as it was as the picture was taken.
Right.
So it produced a very, very, very vivid picture in my mind. So whenever I think about who I would be in the future, I think about that picture, and that picture looks back at me.
Okay.
That's a very Carl Jung idea. When you imagine yourself in the future, it's the same thing as your future yourself looking back at your current self,
Right.
which means you're creating a potential time loop in your own mind. Because that image is going to be connected to the moment where in the future you will indeed look back at your present self, and you're going to relive the same thing going in the opposite direction, which is truly mind-boggling.
Back through time instead of forward through time.
But I mean, you travel through time all the time, every time you think about the past.
Right.
So if you can think about the past and revive memories, then there's no reason to think that when you think about the future, when in the future you think about the past,
Ooh.
those are not connected. Because you
That's
don't
juicy.
forget things. You forget how to get there, but you don't forget things.
Yeah.
So you effectively travel through time through your memories, and they get changed with time. So they're never really the same.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I was going with this.
No,
because
I'm glad you
I
brought
was,
this up.
I was going somewhere that I completely lost it. It had to do with Marcus Aurelius. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about self-talk a bit
Yeah.
because that played a big role in helping me get out of that barrel so that I could start brewing beer and I can start playing with real barrels, you know?
Yeah, of course.
I listened to a podcast by Jordan Peterson where he was proposing this idea that you should treat yourself as you would with someone you care deeply about, right? And I interpreted that in a bit of a different way. I started to take care of myself or to relate to myself as I would do with an employee,
Okay.
and then as a team. Because I have many ideas all the time and they consume me. Ideas that aren't used are consuming.
Yeah.
Ideas that aren't exploited become a cancer. So I have to handle my imagination. I have to deal with it, right? It's just like a second person that lives in my mind because I'm a very creative person. It's a burden, it's a responsibility, it's not a superpower. it's just a problem to solve, right? It demands fixing. So I started doing self-talk. I would sit on the couch and I would pretend that there was someone who's my manager, who's reviewing my past activities, and who's thinking about whether or not they should delegate some work to other people. Can I handle the things that I have in my life right now? And if so, what are the right tools? Should I dispatch to others? And I developed this sort of, self-talk mechanism where I have this mixture of severity and ruthlessness on the one hand, and on the other hand, gentleness and care. It's good to look at yourself with a distance and to be severe because reality is going to be severe. Your friends very often will be severe. Your adversaries certainly will be severe. Like reality will be hard on you. So you might as well be hard on yourself because you're sparing you a lot of trouble.
I like that.
But on the other hand, and this is true, especially when you don't have a very, 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 very close support in life. It's also true if you have a very close support in life in the form of a partner, for instance. If you don't have kindness and compassion to balance that harshness with, then you're going to be just as...
I just want to give you some candies.
Oh, we are briefly interrupted for
We're-
the
we've got-
gift of candies. This podcast is presented by Marc-Anne Laramé. No,
And
it's not
turns
presented,
out
but
our,
we have candies.
Turns out our sponsor for
There
today
is
is
so much
Skittles
chaos
and
in here.
Mars.
And I have Starburst.
I thought it would be a good idea.
You're gonna leave.
So random.
If we legitimately get sponsors because of this, oh my
We
god,
could. We have to write to them, I believe.
We probably do.
This is Marc-Anne, everyone.
Yeah, this is the for anybody who remembers me saying, one of my boys named Marc Antoine, Marc Andre. I had a bunch of other names for him. I mean, this is him. This is the beauty, the
man.
beast, the legend, the myth. This is him.
He's handsome enough for the three of us.
See you later, brother. Take care, man. Lots of love.
And his smile is the most dangerous weapon on earth.
His smile could stop a war.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Wow.
This guy, man, this guy's a character
This
if there
was
ever was
pure
one.
chaos.
I'm so glad he did that, though. I mean,
I completely lost my train of thought.
that's okay. We got it. We replaced it with something just
we
as
got
exciting.
candy, right?
We got candy. Yeah.
Who cares
exactly.
about deep thinking?
Yeah, man.
We have
Who needs
chocolate
philosophy when you've got candy? You know?
Starburst.
Starburst. Yeah.
I didn't even know that they exist.
You didn't know Starburst was
I
a thing?
don't eat candy at all.
Neither do I. We'll throw this at Marcin on the way
Yeah,
out.
we should just throw it at his head.
Exactly.
can take
As
it.
hard as we possibly
As
can. Just
hard,
right at his
Even
head.
though he gave this to
He
us.
gave this to us
out
from a
of
place of love, and we're
kindness, and we were just talking about
our
kindness.
response is just
Yeah.
pure war.
So yeah, bottom line, key takeaway here is, it's good to be harsh with yourself, and it's necessary for that to be sustainable.
Mhm.
That you find compassion to yourself. I mean, you have to have some love,
Yeah.
right?
One of the things that, hearing you kind of describe this is something that reminded me of, I've been a big advocate for never show more compassion or conviction for your past self than you do for your future self. And the reason that I say that, and part of why it's internalized so well for me, is I know that the future version of myself will supersede the version of who I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And so why would I be looking back at past versions of myself with anything other than gratitude, appreciation, kindness, compassion, all of these things?
Mm-hmm.
Because the future version of myself is only going to come to fruition because of the past versions of myself. So never show more compassion for the previous versions of yourself than you do for the future versions of yourself. It's a delicate balancing act that I think I have fucked this up way more times than I care to admit.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, multiple times where I haven't practiced what I'm preaching right now, in the sense that I've just caught myself in negative self-talk, because that happens. But being aware enough to be able to pinpoint when you are going down that path, course correcting, pivoting, and getting yourself back on track with respect to if you're working on something, if you're trying to focus on something, if you're trying to alleviate some of the strain, pressure, pain, whatever it might be, of emotional turmoil, emotional trauma, a breakup, something with your parents, any number of things that happen to us as humans.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about all these things, recognize and identify that you can't, as cliche as this is going to sound, you can't have the sunny days, or you can't have an appreciation for the sunny days without going through some of the rainy ones, right? And oftentimes, the past versions of ourselves are the rainy days of our life,
Yeah.
and the future versions of ourselves are the sunny days of our life.
Well, I would say that you should maybe treat cliches the same way you treat yourself.
Yeah, treat them with
'Cause
compassion.
Cliche do have a potential for death, right?
This is true
Not
too.
depth, but depth.
Yeah,
No, I mean, there's something deep in most banal things when you come to think about it, and it's good to be balanced in how you view yourself, past, current, and future. But that makes me think the way that you're talking, to me, means that you, very much like Marcus Aurelius, conduct yourself as you treat philosophy as something that is extremely serious.
I mean, it's a utility belt for me. So when I think about, I say utility belt, and now I'm going to shed a little bit of light on
Now,
the geek,
now I have some.
the geeky side of me.
Oh,
You know,
yeah?
is going to come out. Yeah, but
What kind of geek are you?
I'm the kind of geek who is all about, like I grew up watching, X-Men and Spider-Man and Iron Man.
Rings. fantasy?
No, I never really got into the Tolkien side
What?
of things. Yeah, it was just never my the fantasy side. I never leaned into, not because I didn't enjoy it. I did.
So the X-Men
But-
are not fantasy?
I mean, when I say fantasy, I'm talking. That's right. Actually, that's funny that you say that. No, man, they're real. What do you mean?
Yeah,
What do you
they're
mean? They're
real.
so real.
I want to believe too.
Yeah, exactly. Don't ruin this for me.
Right.
No. I mean, I didn't mean fantasy. I meant. Oh my God, what is it called? Now I'm gonna butcher it. Shows how much of a geek I really am when I can't even think about.
I mean, you're into what superheroes, Marvel?
yeah, man, I
things?
love Marvel stuff.
Yeah. Wakanda
Disney.
Forever coming out soon.
It is, yeah. But I mean, I said this way early on. I think I did a podcast with Marty quite some time back, and I had mentioned to him, I said, I'm really disappointed with the direction that Disney has gone. But I'm going to remember it for what it was, and I'm going to thank it for what it was in my life, and
Yeah.
I'm going to appreciate the things that I appreciate. Just a healthier way to be, and you encourage yourself to appreciate the things that you appreciate, rather than trying to find every little thing that's wrong with them or all these types of things. I'm wearing an Iron Man hat. I mean, I'm still rocking this shit as much as I possibly can.
I loved Iron Man.
Iron Man's cool, man. He's a cool character.
Yeah.
Very, very cool character.
Although some critics have rightfully pointed out to the fact that he essentially represents fascism.
Okay.
In the sense that he represents the rich corporate world doing essentially what they want,
Right.
with essentially no boundary.
Mhm.
Counter argument to that, you could apply that to many heroes who operate outside of the normal world just because of their abilities.
Right.
And the counter argument really to that is any hero is doing things that are extraordinarily outside of the normal world.
Mhm.
Right? I'm sorry, that's a deeply mythological tangent.
That's
has
okay. I mean,
nothing to
we've
do
been
with the rest.
we've been talking about all this for the entire time, so it's right on theme as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, man. When what was I even talking about when I said I'm a bit of a geek? Where was I going with that?
Well, that was another tangent that I started. But you said this is where we were going to see the real geek in me. And I was like, oh yeah, what kind of geek are you?
Oh yeah.
This is on me. This is my
No,
fault.
that's okay, man. That's
I
okay.
did
That's
that.
okay. These tangents are going to happen, and I'd rather they happen as naturally as they do, so we can keep exploring them.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. All of this to say,
Oh, you were talking about how you examine yourself.
yeah, I mean, I examine myself through multiple different lenses, and I try to look back at it with grace. And I had mentioned a little bit earlier that I've messed this up way more times than I care to admit.
That's right.
And the more and more I think about all those mess ups, I say, thank God I call them mess ups. Thank God I celebrate them. I said this to you a little bit earlier, where I said I would rather listen to someone talk about their mistakes, and I would rather speak to someone about my own mistakes. I'd rather talk in front of a room of 1,000 people and talk about my biggest falls, fuck ups, missteps, than talk to them about any of my successes. Only because I feel when you share any kind of a failure, any kind of a loss, any kind of sense of misstep, or anything that just doesn't go your way, it takes, for a lot of people, I think it takes a great deal of courage. But above that, I think it takes a great deal of self-awareness and humility. And I'd like to say that I'm going to be a lifelong student in both of these aspects of my life. And I want to try to facilitate people to do the same on their side.
Yeah.
Because when you meet somebody and you can share I was going to say problems, it's not problems. When you can meet someone and you can share your missteps, and when you can share your own, I guess, perceived failures, they'll learn a lot more about you as a result of it, and they'll see much more of who you really are as a result of it than you just sitting here saying, hey, this worked really, really well for me. This was a win. Wins are easy to talk about. Anybody can talk about a win. And I'm talking no matter how big, no matter how small that win is, anybody can talk about a win. But it takes a special kind of character to talk about a loss, and to talk about it from a place of wanting nothing more than to try to facilitate the person that they're sharing it with to not make the same mistake. When I think about what I want to, I guess I was going to say influence with someone else's life, but what I want to share with people is every single mistake I've ever made, in hopes of freeing up their time, giving back some of their own bandwidth, giving them back some of their own bandwidth, so they don't make the same mistakes I did, and instead free themselves up to make their own mistakes.
And there's no fear, no concern that these people are going to, on the one hand, exploit the knowledge that you're giving them, and on the other hand, judge you harshly for it and then condemn you in some way.
I talk about peace and grace and all these things, but one of my mantras is give less fucks. That's one of my mantras, man.
Do not give fucks.
Yeah, it's not that you don't give a fuck, but I mean, you have a very finite amount. This is where shit's gonna get really, really rowdy. You ready? So
Go ahead.
we're gonna take a dark turn
Be
here.
my guest.
So we have a very finite amount of fucks to give,
Yes.
right? And every day we have this, call it a life bar or call it whatever. This is the video game side of me, the geek side of me is gonna come out. But we have this little life bar, and right, it ticks down as we go through the day. Different things kind of chip away at it.
Yeah.
And if you treat the fucks that you have to give as a resource, you will only allocate those fucks to things that are fuck worthy. It's simple science. I mean, this is math.
Right.
It's arithmetic in the
Yes.
most articulate and
In the
academic
most
way that it could possibly can.
Video game kind of way. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
As if you were literally an RPG and
You got it,
had
man.
just gotten like
You
two
got it.
headshots.
But see, here's the thing. So now if I distill it down to something a little bit more presentable, I would say we have a very finite amount of effort to apply to the things that are important in our life. And if we treat the effort that we have to apply as a resource, we will only instruct that effort to go somewhere and only really feel passionate and driven to expel that effort into something that actually is worth it. That's the nicer way to put it, I suppose. But like
There's
I said,
no way I could disagree with that. I mean, I think it's entirely on point. It's 100% true. I mean, just think about the calories you intake, the energy you have available, the time you have in your day, and all the possibilities that you have. Everything costs something, right? There's nothing like a free lunch. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Everything is costly. You got to pick up your battle. You got to choose your fight.
yeah, man. A good friend of mine, Mike, he said recently, he was actually on the podcast a little while ago, and he had said, and I swear to God, it was one of the most profound things that I've thought about in recent memory, along with some of the stuff that you've said today as well. But he said, time is the great equalizer. We all only have 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And even then, sometimes unfortunately, some of us don't even get that.
Yeah.
So I could go to sleep today, never wake up tomorrow.
And time is a luxury too. It's a luxury that gets more valuable every second.
Yeah, because we have less of it. It's the only thing that we're never going to get back, right? So you have to be hyper critical. This is where I would, I talk about my mantra being give less fucks. That's the really, really high level version of it. What I actually mean is, it's funny, it's almost counterintuitive. It's give more fucks about the things that are worth it.
Yeah.
Is what I actually mean. So be more intentional about who you're spending your time with. Be way more intentional about the way you're spending your own time with yourself.
Yeah.
When you think about simple things like those bad habits that we have, free will is a really funny illusion that we should talk about at some
Good
point as
old
well.
free will.
Yeah, but free will is a really hilarious illusion because think about all the shit that you're not supposed to be doing
Well, I would say
and
that
how you
from
do
a-
it anyway.
from a purely stress level, from a purely psychological level, I guess, free will isn't free. I mean, it's a huge burden on you to decide on your own, based strictly on criteria that you've determined for yourself, free of any sort of outside influence, what you should do, what is good, and then what's good for society. Because free will has implications. If you freely decide something, it doesn't just apply to you, it applies to other. So it's not just the question of how much free will there is. It's really a question of how much does it cost you and others. And when I mean cost, I really mean, do you want to shoulder it alone? Because then all the failures and all the bad decisions
Are on you.
and they're on no one else, but they also affect others.
Yeah.
And then there's the paradox of free will, which is the more free will I give you, the less you want to take. Because you're essentially a chimp. I mean, not you.
Not taking
but
it personally, I don't.
biologically, right? We're like our ancestors who
Yeah.
were jumping from one branch to another and who were meant to deal with immediate dangers and not chronic dangers like a mortgage.
Yeah.
So, free will is good when you live in small societies with simple choices. It's a big stressor when you have thousands of decisions where you know virtually little variable and where everything is super abstract and where it's constant all the time, uninterrupting, endless,
Yeah,
continuous.
I'd like to believe that, ideally, the decisions that we make are always to better our own lives and the lives of the people that are close to us, around us, the society. And I'm not just talking close to us and near us personally. I'm talking within our proximity, within our vicinity, within our society.
It's a hard thing to achieve.
I think it's impossible to some
You're
extent.
meant to seek immediate pleasure and, proximate sources of sugar.
Well, this is why I say it's impossible, because all of the ways that I perceive decisions that I make to better my life,
Yeah.
you might look at the exact same decisions and feel completely otherwise. Like you might feel the complete opposite way. And
Yeah.
the decisions that I make might adversely affect the life that you are currently living. I can never know the different variables and the wide range of things that you are taking on as a human.
Mm-hmm.
Because for all the ways that, actually, here's a fun little question for you. What's more complex than one human with all of his or her thoughts? It's way easier than you think.
Two humans with his or her own thoughts.
You got it.
I was going to go for the entire universe when you think about the parallel dimensions that exist.
Yeah. No, that's way out there. That's a more academic response.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking distill it right down to the most
Yeah.
basic fundamental.
Yeah.
What's more complicated than one human with its own thoughts, or two humans with
Yeah.
their own thoughts?
I spend a lot of time thinking about relationships and what makes them successful and sustainable, and it's scary shit. Like I've been single for a really long time now, and I look at the relationships in a very academic fashion,
Okay.
like as successful enterprises. 'Cause
Okay, cool.
Like companies that make it and that survive, right? And that aren't undone by competitors.
Oh
right?
man, so in this case, competitors would be like another guy or
Or
something?
that doesn't split up, right? Or that doesn't do
Okay, got it,
like
got it.
mergers.
Oh,
So it's
man.
it's a case. It's an analogy where if a company splits in two, it's like it's a disaster. It's not
Oh,
supposed to
man.
happen. So that's how I look at it, right? And
Yeah.
communication is always the issue. Like people talk to me about their relationship things, their relationship things. I shouldn't say that. Their relationship problems sometimes, and I
Right.
listen because I think I'm a decent listener. And it's always about communications. It's always about I did that and I meant that, but he or she did not understand. And then the other says, well, he or she said that, but then she did that, and what they meant was this, and when you compare the two stories, they have nothing in common.
Yeah.
And it always boils down to communication. And I look at this through how people need to be loved and how people need to love. Because there's three dimensions to that.
hmm
Well, first there's the famous 5 languages of love, how people
Yeah.
speak different love languages. But that's the surface. I mean, it's arbitrary, but it at least it identifies things that must be discussed and that are important. But then the second layer is, okay, how do you need to be loved? How do you get your fun in a relationship? How do you get your validation? Well, do you need your validation? So that's level 2. Level 3 is, how can you love? It's one thing to be told how to behave with someone that you're with. It's one thing to be actually shown, yeah, this is what I want, because then you can do it. It's identified. But the third layer, the most complicated part is, how are you able to love someone? What language can you speak? Can you learn it? Is it within your competence? And another aspect is like, are you able to say what you need from a couple, from a relationship? Most people don't think about that.
Yeah.
I don't think so. And sometimes that's fine, because there are people that are essentially soulmates that have known each other for so long, that are just basically compatible on every single level. But many relationships fail. They just do.
We haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but I ran a men's group and a women's group for a while. And one of the things that constantly came up, and this was a group that was initially designed to discuss how to match your professional aspirations with your personal goals without having to compromise on either. And this started with men, and the reason was I wanted more masculine energy in my life, and I wanted more high quality, top tier, S tier men in my life. And at the time,
Like Navy SEALs.
yeah, not just Navy SEALs. I'm talking guys who were their own point of origin. This is the easiest way for me to ever describe it. You have to be your own point of origin.
What does that mean?
So oftentimes I had men coming through there who they would say, "Hey man, I just want to fuck more pussy." And then there was the other side of the spectrum, which was I've built a life that I'm really proud of. And I think one way to really complement that and to really build on that life is to pair it with a woman who is really comfortable with who she is. So I would see both ends of this spectrum, two completely different sides of the coin here. And for the former, there was always this void that they were trying to fill with women.
Yeah.
Versus with this other side, there was not a void. There was an aspect of their life that they hadn't explored. There were two very, very different.
It's literally like comparing a minus and a plus.
Yeah.
Like electrons that are charged and electrons that aren't charged.
Yeah,
Like
one's that a negative charge and a positive charge.
Thank you, because I'm terrible at this. I knew the analogy was good, but I knew that I didn't have the right terms.
No, it worked, man. It worked.
So we know what we mean. We know what I mean. It's interesting because they're so far apart. They're exactly opposites.
Yeah.
They're the exact
They
opposites.
repel. Like they don't. There's no magnetism between them. It's complete repel. And the guys who were looking to fill that void, they are not their own point of origin. They do not have a point of origin. Versus the men who were saying, "Hey, I'd like to, to pursue a relationship with a woman who I feel could add value to my life and whose life I feel I could add value to." They were their own point of origin. They were always the ones who were healthier in their mind, healthier in their soul and their spirit, and actually, funny enough, they were also healthier physically. They just led healthier lifestyles. And I kid you not, man, 9.5 out of 10 times, the men who were their own point of origin were the men who also went on to better their lives in several other aspects of it as well.
I believe you, and I still find that the expression
Point of origin?
is unsatisfactory.
Probably because it's a little more basic than it needs to be.
To me, it must mean that that's because they're more mature, they're more self-aware, but I'm not sure that's what you mean.
Yeah, it is what I mean, to some extent. The bigger part of this is when you are your own point of origin, you won't put, and I've said this before in other podcasts, people who've listened to a couple of them will understand and recognize me saying this, but people who are their own point of origin will be selfish. And I don't mean this disparagingly. I mean this in as positive a light as I can possibly say. So for me to have met you today, I want to be, prior to us having met, I want to be as selfish with my life as I possibly can. I don't mean not sharing, and I don't mean not putting things forward for the people around me. I mean doing everything I possibly can to lead the best life that I can in every aspect that I possibly can, and to improve myself every step of the way with as much regard for my own betterment as I possibly can. Because then when I finally have the opportunity to meet you, I want to know for sure with 100% certainty and with complete conviction in myself that I am putting my best foot forward when I meet you. And that any way that I can contribute to your life, I'm doing so in as best a way as I possibly can.
So there are many elements of that definition that don't fit with selfish.
Yeah, because selfish usually has a negative connotation associated with it. But I think when you're looking after yourself, when you're trying to put your best foot forward for someone, no one else can look after you the way that you can. And in turn, if I sit here and I keep talking about how, you haven't heard me say this yet, but I want to get to the top and I want to bring as many people with me as I can. I have no intention of going there by myself. I think it'd be boring as shit. And honestly, I don't even think I would get there. If you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, bring your squad. And so I look at this and I say, I have a very, very real opportunity in my life to push past any barrier, limit, roof, you name it, ceiling that I have placed for myself, whether by perception or otherwise. But I want to do so with high quality humans by my side, whatever that looks like. So the selfish part of it, you're right, it's almost at odds with what I'm saying. But the reason that I say it the way that I do is because it always sparks intrigue. Every single time I've said it to somebody, they've always come back and said exactly what you did. But wait a second, that doesn't sound selfish. And
well, it's an enlightened selfishness, if you want.
Maybe.
Or a social one, at least.
maybe, yeah,
Or
I'd say
a-
more social than enlightened. I don't
Or
think
a
enlightened.
collegial one, at the very least.
Yeah,
Because the basics are there, right? The main elements of being selfish are present. You're doing it for you, and you've selected methods that just happens to be compatible with the goals of others.
right.
You've decided that the way to the top is with others.
Yeah. But I also want to make sure that I don't slow us down. And the only way that I can make sure I don't slow us down is by doing everything that I possibly can to
Is
keep pushing myself to level up.
Is it necessary to be a leader?
I don't think it's so much about being a leader. I'm not interested in being a leader.
No.
But instead, I'm interested in leading by example, not necessarily as a leader. But I want to set a precedence for excellence for myself and for the people around me. And I look to that as not just my guiding light and my North Star, but I look to that as being the single best way that I can meet people like yourself, like other people that I've been fortunate enough to meet, and to have as deeply meaningful a conversation with them as I possibly can about whatever the hell we feel like. If we want to talk about my personal life, we want to talk about their personal life, we want to talk about our biggest failures, our great wins, whatever it is. I feel the single best way to facilitate those conversations is to make sure that I'm prepared to have them. And for me, the best way that I can prepare to have them, you know, I said this to you a little bit earlier, luck is what happens when opportunity meets preparation. The best way that I feel I can prepare is to selfishly take on every opportunity that I possibly can. And whether I, you know, knock it out of the park or fall completely flat, doesn't matter. At least I know without any kind of hesitation, without any reservation, that I didn't stop myself from doing something.
I believe that's the true meaning of carpe diem, of the classic expression "seize the day." I don't think "seize the day" has anything to do with pleasure, as it's often portrayed. I think it's a more profound meaning than that, which is go get the opportunities to grow and become yourself. And that might be just, you know, ignorance on my part because I'm not that fluent in ancient Greek. I don't speak ancient Greek at all. What I mean is I don't know the classics that much, but I do realize that at their core, the classics, the ancient schools of thought from ancient Greece, they speak of things that are, well, just very, very, very deep and extremely relevant. We tend to think of some of them as being superficial about pleasure, about, you know, renouncing the world, especially with the Epicureans, about, you know, concentrating on the pleasures, but it's a misconception. It's the simple things that are beneficial to you. And it's also the things that are beneficial to you in general. And that's always the same. It's always self-awareness, education, fitness. But seizing the opportunity it's in itself a supremely well-organized, understandable guiding principle. Because it means that you have to think about what's an opportunity for you. That means you have to think about, well, what you're actually interested about. And that is who you are, your interest, your direction, your what drives you. Again, the endless stream that guides your life.
The streams that continuously keep flowing.
Yeah, the gift that
Actually,
keeps on giving.
Was it the gift that keeps on giving?
Yeah, that's the stream that
You
keeps
might-
on streaming. That's Netflix.
Oh, there it is.
We just found it.
There it is.
That's Netflix.
That's their
All right, that's the show,
their new
everyone.
that's their new slogan.
We were
huh?
talking about Netflix.
We were
this whole
done.
time.
Yeah, we
By
had
the
this
way,
whole time.
Netflix, you should credit us for this. This is a wonderful line.
Think about all the sponsors we're going to pick up today, right? Netflix, Skittles, Mars, Starburst,
Starburst.
whatever beer you're drinking right now. Oh man.
Oh yeah, that's West Coast from the Chelsea pub.
Oh,
It's really good.
they make that one themselves, right?
They make it all by themselves,
Look at them go.
for they do brew excellent beer,
I'm glad to see them succeeding. They're a cool little shop, man.
and we love success.
We do indeed.
Do you want to bring them up the elevator? And
The-
your way up to the top?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
If I could bring the Chelsea, oh man, if I could bring the
man.
Chelsea pub
Let's
with me,
bring Chelsea and Gatineau
why not?
and Quebec and Ontario and Canada.
Look at where we are right now with Ergon, right? I mean, Ergon is a great little place to cultivate a lot of that talent, to cultivate a lot of that energy.
Well, that's why we're having this discussion, really. We met at Ergon because of the personalities that lead Ergon, that create fertile conditions for these extremely unlikely conversations.
But fun and important ones, nonetheless. I think that's a good spot for us to leave the first round here, man. How many more of these do you think we're going to end up doing?
I have no idea, but I don't think it's going to be one or
It's not-
two
it
or
can't
three.
be- yeah, it can't
I
be just a
think,
handful.
it's just a question of time and timing.
Yeah. Well, we've already got the chemistry. The timing is the only thing we're missing now, so we'll figure it out.
Remember the stream that keeps on streaming.
That's going to be, is that where we're going to open up every show with that, huh? Or we'll create a little segment where Pierre gives us some of his most wise, what's one that I can share? Remember, today is the tomorrow you worried about yesterday. Wow. Think about that one.
Mm-hmm.
Today is the tomorrow you
As I'm
worried about
streaming
yesterday.
on Netflix. I'll do
Yeah,
just that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, brother. Well, look, man, I'm so glad that we got to chat. I'm so glad that we got to do this. I cannot wait for round 2. We're going to make it happen soon. We already have something in the books, so it'll be fun to pick up where we left off.
It's coming up.
Yeah, man. And we'll talk a little bit more about beer next time, because I know, I think it's safe to say you know a thing or two.
A thing or two.
Just a thing or two.
Let's
Let's, man.
hop
brother.
on. All right.
We'll talk soon, man.
Cheers.